Hi, I'm Joey Lott, and in this video, I'd like to respond to an email that I received quite a while ago, so I don't know how relevant the specifics of this email are still to the person who sent it. However, I think in general, the topic is anxiety and anger, and I think that's applicable all the time. But this was specifically in regard to the recent presidential election in the United States, and the person who sent the email said that she feels a lot of anxiety and anger regarding the election and the outcome and everything else surrounding that, I guess. So the person who sent this email wonders what's to do with this. So there's anger and there's anxiety. What should I do? And of course, I don't know what you should do, but I can tell you what I have found through my own inquiry, and I'll just inquire directly right now and share with you what I discovered. So when I feel anxious or angry, and you're asking the right person because I often feel anxious and angry. These are experiences that are very familiar to me. So when I experience anger or anxiety, or a combination of both, which is sometimes the case, then the question is that I've often asked in my life is, what do I do about this? And what I've found is, just being observant, I started to notice that it had been decades of asking that question and trying different strategies to do something in order to get rid of or relieve the feelings that I had that I called anxiety and anger, which is understandable because that I would do that because I wanted to have that relief. But what I started to discover just by being observant was that it wasn't working. In fact, the more that I tried to do something in order to get rid of or relieve the anxiety and anger, the more anxiety and anger seemed to be a problem in my life. And in my case, it got to a point where it certainly appeared to be a big problem that was all-consuming in my life. And I've written about that elsewhere, so if you've read much of my work, then you may be familiar with some of my story that illustrates that. So what I saw when I started to really get honest about this was that that was the wrong question. What do I do about it was the wrong question. Even though it was so seductive, it seemed like, yeah, I have to do something. And I could fixate on that all day long, and I could tell all kinds of stories about I have to do something about it, and I could connect it to a larger story. So, for example, in this case, there's anxiety and anger, and it's tied to the story about the election, and it may certainly have been triggered by the election. But then what can happen, and I'm just sharing with you what my take on that would be if I don't do something about the anger and anxiety, I'll be complacent, and there does seem to be a problem. I disagree very strongly with the outcome of this election. I don't mind sharing. I have, I guess, what you would consider radical political views, which is that I believe that the entire government structure is in service of itself and not in service of the people or the planet or any other beings on the planet. So I'm not a big fan. Whatever the outcome of the election had been, I would have probably not been thrilled about it. But certainly with the election of Donald Trump, I see a lot of things that I find to be perhaps scary. I can see that. Certainly things that don't jibe with my views and my preferences. And I can understand how, in light of that, the sense can be, if I don't do something about the anxiety and anger, then this is going to be allowed to run amok and do all kinds of destruction and harm. And so I feel I must do something about the anxiety and anger, because now I've linked it to this larger story, which is not just about me and my preferences now. It's not just about my feelings, but now it's about something much larger, something that seems much more important. It's about women's rights, it's about environmental rights, it's about all of these things, right? It's about, racism, and I mean, all kinds of things, right? I can link it to all of these things, but the reality that I found for myself, and I'm not suggesting that this will be true for you, but you can certainly inquire and discover for yourself. The reality that I found for myself is that's not really true. That's a justification for continuing to try to solve the problem as I've perceived it. But actually, when I fixate on that problem as I've seen it, trying to get rid of the anxiety and anger, the outcome of that is not world peace. It's not gender equality. It's not the end of racism. It's not environmental protection. It's not any of these things. The outcome of that is more of a perception of problem, more of a sense that the anxiety and anger are a problem and that they've grown larger, more urgency to fix my problem. So I've linked it to a larger story which does not actually help to solve whatever larger problem I perceive that there is. All it does is it gets me more enmeshed in my own nightmare. So for myself, what I've discovered is that it's the wrong question, and the right question, or a better question, let's say, is what's actually happening? How, and this is another way of saying the same question, how am I attempting to do something about what's happening? And so I can just start to inquire into that, and what I've discovered for myself is that I have walked around most of my life with an armor, attempting to protect myself against my own experience. So it's an ineffective armor. But this is how I've done it: is I've externalized my own experience. I've said that the anxiety and anger are over there, and I wear the armor to protect myself against them. Now, of course, this is not the reality. There is no such distance between me and my experience. In my experience at least, that's a false distinction. But that's the way that I lived most of my life. That I lived with this idea, and I was constantly trying to protect myself from my own experience, to get rid of the anger and anxiety and anything else that I didn't want. And when I started to see that, I saw that I'm doing this. Now, it was so conditioned, so habitual, so unconscious up to that point that it seemed as though it was not something that I was doing or choosing. But when I began to actually see what was going on, I realized that it was something that I was doing, and that I actually could choose to let go of that armor. Now, that was really scary, even to contemplate that, but once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it, and it started to work on me, and I continued to inquire, can I let go of the armor? How do I maintain the armor? For me, it was a tension in the body, and that as I inquired in that tension and let go of that tension, I noticed the subtler and subtler layers of that tension. And as I continued to inquire, and this took many months, and it's an ongoing process, by the way, but there was an intense inquiry for a period of months that really unraveled a lot of this, that I started to embody the direct knowing that I'm not separate from my experience, that the fear, the anxiety, the anger, all of the experience, the sadness, I'm not separate from that. I can't separate myself from that. I can't protect myself from that. And none of the things that the stories that I've attached to explain my experience and explain my model of the world, none of those stories have actually served me or anyone else. They're not, for the purposes of the inquiry, they don't appear to be true. So can I be willing to let go of that just for the purpose of the inquiry? Now, if it turns out to be true later on, of course I can pick it back up and work with it, but just for the purposes of inquiry, can I let go of that? Just set it aside, let go, soften for a moment, stop clinging to all of these hopeful uh, ambitions for a solution to my perceived problem, and just admit that maybe I don't know what the actual problem is. Maybe there is not a problem. Maybe the experience of anger and anxiety is not a problem. Not to take that on as a new belief, but just to be willing to entertain that as part of the inquiry. And as I continued to do that, I realized that I had been fighting with myself. That was the only thing I was fighting with. I wasn't fighting with Donald Trump. I wasn't fighting with the system. I wasn't fighting with racism. I wasn't fighting with any of these things. I was fighting with my own experience. I wasn't helping anything. I was only hurting me. And when I saw that, I realized that wasn't what I wanted to do any longer. And I had, through this inquiry, seen clearly enough how I did the armoring, how I did that fighting, that I was able to continue to set that down, to let it go, to soften. And as I say, it's an ongoing process. It's not something that's done. It's an ongoing living inquiry. It's life. But that seeing, that inquiry has been very valuable to me. And I will say that if I desire to be effective or efficient in doing something, to further a cause or something that I value, I feel much more capable of doing that now than I did when I was fighting with myself. And it's just very clear to me now that fighting with my own experience will not result in any positive outcome for any cause that I'm interested in, because that fighting with my own experience is so myopic, it's so self-centered, it's so isolated within this structure of self that it couldn't possibly have any beneficial effect. I shouldn't say possibly, it's very unlikely to have a beneficial effect on anything, any cause outside of what I perceive to be myself. And I think that we can see that this is the case, with a lot of the people that we hold up and we say these people are champions for something righteous. They're champions for equality of various kinds. They're champions for goodness and life and richness and diversity and all these things. These people, historically and presently, who are actually effective in those endeavors, from my perspective, it seems pretty obvious that to a great extent they've been willing to set aside fighting with themselves. They've been willing to stop being so self-centered. And I don't mean that in like an insulting way, like stop being self-centered. I mean, I think it does require an intense inquiry to discover what's true. And I really think that the people who are effective in these movements, who actually bring about change and who are notable, and I'm sure we can call to mind many names who come to mind. I think if you look at their lives and you look at their words and their deeds, I think it becomes obvious they were willing, or are willing presently, to let go of their ideas of the importance of themselves and their feelings, and fighting with themselves to get themselves right, because they realized that that was never going to bring about the change that they valued. It was never going to highlight and emphasize the things of importance to them, which are not about the self-center. And it's a dangerous way to live, and we can see that that's true because a lot of these people historically who have been willing to do this and to speak up and to really embody that larger perspective, the self, not necessarily entirely selfless, but a largely selfless perspective, we see that they often are killed. So it's a dangerous way to be, because it runs, because that's an actual, it actually poses a real threat to the system that's in place, the status quo, particularly anything oppressive. So those are my thoughts on the matter. As always, I encourage you to look for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Just find out what's true for you. Inquire directly. And again, my name is Joey Lott. You can find my website at joeylott.com. That's JOEYLOTT.com. If you haven't already, please go there to sign up for the free ebook, Lose All the Weight. At least that's what's available there now as I record this. As I say, it's totally free, and it explores these sorts of subjects in more depth. And please share these videos with other people who you know who may be interested. If you're watching this on Facebook, like the page, please. If you're watching it on YouTube, please subscribe to my channel. And if you have questions that you'd like me to address in another video, you can send them to me at joeylott@gmail.com, JOEYLOTT@gmail.com. And again, my website is joeylott.com. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.